Good evening, everybody. Thank you for having me here at the Angular Meetup. How was the apero? Was it good? Yeah. We organized it just for you. I want to start with a small story. The story starts in 2014, and it's about the AngularJs developer. Might have some similarities with me. And this AngularJs developer, he went to a very nice city here in Europe. He went to Paris. The reason why he went to Paris was because there was a conference. It was a conference about Angular. It's called ngConf Europe. And at this conference, it was like a milestone in the Angular history. It's where they introduced Angular 2. And some of you might remember how the presentation went. So like they pretty much like deprecated everything of AngularJS. And yeah, you know how like whenever a developer is not happy, what he does is he opens his laptop and he tweets about it. And this was what happened. These are actual tweets. I'm not sure if you can read them. But it's, I really like the one in the middle, like, did Angular just commit suicide? And yeah, screw you, Angular, that was another tweet. So yeah, that was in 2014, long time ago. Actually, it was 5 years ago, which is in terms of JavaScript or in like front-end developer world, it's a century. So today, 5 years later, I see a lot of Angular applications in production, and I also see a lot of hybrid Angular applications in production. I'm Christian Kohler, as Thomas already introduced me. This is my Twitter handle. And I already gave this talk, or a similar talk, 2 years ago at the Fox Days. Back then it was quite new, the whole Angular migration topic. And last Meetup, what was your name again? The top right. Silvano approached me, and we talked about Angular migration, and we realized it's still a very, it's still a topic which is something a lot of developers have to care day by day. So I thought, yeah, let's reheat the talk, and that's what I did. So this talk is basically the talk which I gave 2 years ago. I updated the talk, and I also added a lot of nice things on top of it. First part's going to be more on a high-level side, where we look at concepts, and the second part, which I think is really what's going to be really interesting, is about more like how the magic works of Angular migration. So let's start with why would you migrate? The title of the talk is how you migrate Angular applications in an enterprise environment, and that's already a very important point on like why you migrate. It's Angular enterprise companies on an enterprise level, they really care about end of life, for example. Who knows the end of life of AngularJS?
2021.
Yeah. So a lot of companies think, I might not agree that they have to get rid of all AngularJS code by then. That's one reason why you migrate. But there are a lot of things why you migrate also from a technical aspect. So I think Angular compared to AngularJS is it's so much better. It's so much faster, so much easier to work with change detection. The whole dependency injection is much nicer. It has an Angular CLI, better module system. There's so many things on a technical level why you might want to upgrade to be faster with your to develop your features. The second question I get a lot is, so yeah, why even bother to migrate to AngularJS? You could just like migrate to React, Vue, or whatever framework you want to migrate to. And I think whenever you migrate to another framework, it's going to be mostly a big bang. It's really hard to migrate slide by slide. And that's something you can actually do with AngularJS and Angular, and that's what I want to show you today. How to avoid the big bang. Second thing about is like the team, the people developing your application. They're mostly already into AngularJS, so it's going to be easier for them to also work with Angular compared to maybe React. So that's also a reason. So that's why you migrate. Now, how to migrate? As I said, it's enterprise, so big bang is not an option here. It's not like your to-do list. You can just like sit down for a week and rewrite it and put it to production again. It's going to be about applications which have thousands of lines of code, hundreds of modules and whatever. And nobody allows you to just sit down for 3 months or whatever and just rewrite the application without bringing some features. They also want to have new releases during that time. So one of the most important things is that we can continuously migrate and not having a big bang. We have kind of like 3 steps how to migrate if you want to start with it. The first one is prepare. The second one is go hybrid. And the third one is continuous migration. This is what I already discussed. You want to have releases. And the great part is AngularJS, the red part is Angular. And with every release, you might have a little bit more Angular code in your application, but you want to ship a hybrid application. All right, preparation. The first thing you do when you think about having a migration, you go online, Google, and the first thing you're going to find is a migration guide of Angular, which is a very good guide on how to migrate. It has a lot of like examples and it's very comprehensive. So definitely recommend this one. A second thing you often hear is go migrate to TypeScript. I think it's a valid point. I didn't put that up here because I think it's not the most important point. It's nice to have, it's not necessary. What is more important is that you have a component-based architecture. It's going to be really, really, really difficult if you still have those controllers in a hierarchical way somewhere. It's almost impossible. You have to refactor that first into component-based hierarchy. That's really something you need to do. I talked about how Angular provides documentation how to upgrade. What they also provide is a very nice way how you can run Angular and AngularJS in parallel, side by side. And you can even use services from Angular in AngularJS and vice versa. You can downgrade and upgrade components, so you can use components in one framework or the other one. And the tool is called Angular Upgrade. Oops, it's a little bit blurry, but yeah. It's a great tool, and I think it's not possible without that tool to have a continuous migration. We go into that a little bit later in more detail. When you want to go hybrid, as you can see, you have this tree of components, and you start to mix components. And there are more or less 2 ways on how to, what the strategy can be on how to migrate. I call them bottom-up and top-down. You also might have heard horizontal and vertical migration, which is more or less the same thing. So bottom-up is vertical, top-down is horizontal. One very easy thing to think about that is that 99% top-down is better. Whenever there's hardly ever a case where you would consider a bottom-up migration. I've never seen one, and I also haven't read about the bottom-up migration. So if you ever heard about the bottom-up migration or you do that, I would be really interested to hear about that. For me, most important thing whenever I think about like a strategy is that I wouldn't do a mixed approach in like the meaning that it's okay to have a horizontal migration, like a top-down, and within that tree maybe have some components which are still AngularJS, but I wouldn't mix it up that you have in your tree you have an AngularJS component, then an Angular component, then again an AngularJS component. So that makes it much harder to actually migrate the whole application. So try to avoid that. It's not always possible, but try to avoid that. Yeah, zoom in. Yeah, so in general, if you have a very flat hierarchy of the routing service, you might think about migrating the whole router at once. If you have a very nested router hierarchy, it's going to be a very nice way to use both routers in a hybrid mode. Again, just to say, like, when you think about AngularJS components as technical debt, it's really fine to migrate step by step, and it's also really okay to deploy a hybrid application to production. It's going to be a little bit slower because you have to bundle AngularJS as well, but in general it's not a problem, and I've seen a lot of applications running hybrid in production. When we migrated the components, it was really difficult to actually plan them because, like, you can't just say in the next sprint we just migrate 10 components because nobody would agree to that. So what we did is usually, like, we had a tactic of, like, we decided whether a component falls into one of the three categories. First category would be it's something we refactor very heavily anyway, so we would already refactor it with Angular. If the component is not used anymore, we just throw it away. That's the second thing. And the third thing would be components which we don't touch, but eventually have to migrate. So those were the components we actually planned as separate stories. That's a component. So, and with services, it's much easier. So services are basically singletons, and you can just up and downgrade as how you want to do it. Doesn't really matter. There's no big strategy behind them. Do it as you think it's the best. Most important thing here is singleton, and we're also going to dive into that a little bit later. Okay, so this is how to migrate. Now, I promised you we're going to do a deep dive, and that's what we're going to do now. Because now we just heard about a few strategies and so on. And when I started migrating Angular applications, there's one thing which really, like, helped me a lot to understand all the concepts and how the whole thing works. And that's what I want to show to you today. So, where to start here? Just today, I helped a team preparing a migration, and when I talked to them, they said, okay, they understand the concept. They have a downgrade, upgrade method, and so on. But for them, it was magic. They really didn't know how that works, like how the both of those frameworks, like, work together. And it's really, really simple. And I want to show you an example. And for that example, I use an analogy. So you might have heard about this one. Like, was a really clever guy who outsourced his job to China. And the best thing about that is on a review, the performance review, they said that he was one of the best developers. So, but eventually they found it out because there was some traffic from China, and they were thinking it was an intruder, and so they found out. But it was a very clever guy. So let's say the guy in the US is Bob, and the guy in China, the code monkey, is Bruce. And let's say Bob is going to be Angular. And we have Bruce. Bruce is going to be AngularJS. So what we want to do is we are in the Angular world, and actually we don't want to use Bob. We actually want to, like, just say whenever someone calls Bob, we actually want to let Bruce do the work. Who knows AngularJS? Okay, so everyone knows the code. Who knows Angular syntax? So yeah, perfect. I see why you're here. Okay, so this is our CodeMonkey service in Angular. Fun fact, this thing works. You can use emojis as tokens. I'm going to refactor the whole application tomorrow. This is the Angular world. In the Angular world, we have the developer service, which we register in our module. Looks very similar if you compare this. Both times it's the same service, same interface. Not having an interface though, but they work the same. So now, if you think about, or I want to show you how an application bootstraps. So the first thing when an application bootstraps is it runs the ng-bootstrap method if you run it manually. Usually you use just a component like your bootstrap component and it automatically bootstraps your application, but you can also use the ng-bootstrap hook for it. What happens is that it creates an app injector or a root injector. Some of you might know that there's not only one injector, there's a whole hierarchy of injectors, but for the simplicity, we just say we have one injector here, which is the root injector or app injector. And yeah, we create a reference to the Bob service. And the next thing we're going to call is Angular Bootstrap. Angular Bootstrap creates an injector as well. And creates the Bruce or the CodeMonkey service. So till that step, both applications are very separate. They don't share anything. They're two separate applications running in the same browser. Now the magic happens with the upgrade module. So you replace Angular with upgrade and call the bootstrap to the upgrade method. And by doing that, a very clever thing happens. What happens is that the AngularJS injector gets a reference to the app injector and vice versa. So the Angular injector has a reference to the injector. And this really blew my mind. Like this is, and Thomas, by the way, that's the big emoji I told you going to show. It's the biggest emoji I've ever shown on a slide. If you remember this, and if you know this, then so many things are so much easier when you do a migration. So this is the Angular Bootstrap, everybody knows that. And this is how the signature looks like with upgrade module. It's the same signature. So it looks kind of the same. But let me show what happens when you call this method. Can you read it? I can't make it bigger though, but I hope you can read it. So what happens is you call the bootstrap method, and what you do is we create a new Angular module, and we bootstrap that module. The module is called init module or whatever. And the first thing is we create a new value with the injector key and the injector. So we set the injector as a value in the Angular JS environment. And this way we already have a reference to the Angular injector in AngularJS. And the next line is the run, where we then have the AngularJS injector and set this AngularJS injector in Angular. So with those two lines, we kind of married AngularJS and Angular. That's really magic. And now with this knowledge we can do a lot of fun things. Just for the completion's sake, after that we initialize our root component, which it can be done by Angular or by AngularJS. So the first really cool thing we can do is we can actually just get the injector from Angular wherever we are. So when we are in any component, we just can inject the AngularJS injector into that component and can call a service like that. It's that easy. So you might ask yourself, so why do we need a upgrade or downgrade service? So you can just do that. The answer is we actually do exactly that. So this is the code you have to write if you want to use an AngularJS service within Angular. As you might notice, the similarity between this one and this one, it's very close. So what we do is we say we have a new factory. The factory has one dependency, which is the AngularJS injector. So whenever we want to provide the My Angular service, we just use the Angular injector and then get the My AngularJS service from that. Very simple. So there's actually no glue code between AngularJS and Angular to provide a service in Angular. It looks a little bit different in the AngularJS world. So here, if you want to use an Angular service in AngularJS, we have this downgrade injectable. So again, a lot of magic. Gonna show you the code behind this downgrade injectable. What it does, it gets the injector, and through this injector, through this AngularJS injector, we can actually get the Angular injector, and then we just return the actual thing we want to get from the Angular injector. That's it. Any questions so far? Who knew that with the injector that you share them? Yes, for sure. Thomas knew. Okay. Now let's do some hands-on. It's already started, that's good. So what we have here is a very simple application. This is actually the whole Angular application I want to use today. There's nothing else in here. If you look in the app, it's just the app module, that's it. And yeah, just want to play around a little bit. So let's first open the application. Sorry, I have to make it smaller. All right. Does anybody know how to make the developer tools bigger without the mouse?
Control plus.
Control plus?
Yep. It's like a website. Command plus. Command plus.
Yeah, but just the website.
Like control and like trackpad, if you click on it.
Doesn't work. So it's going to be really small, and sorry for that. But okay, so I have some fun things to do with you, and I think those things I'm going to show now. I hope that first I can show you some things about how Angular migration or how a hybrid application works, and I also hope that I'm going to show you some things of AngularJS or Angular. Okay, so the first thing I want to show you is how to bootstrap your application manually. So what you have here is your component, this one here. You have your module. That's your whole application at the moment. And you know this one here, which is the Bootstrap. So Bootstrap actually tells application which component to bootstrap. So if you remove that one here, yeah, you can't see it, but yeah, nothing happened because it couldn't bootstrap the application. Now, what I add now is the ng-bootstrap method. With this, Angular actually the module actually loads something, but it didn't bootstrap the application, so we just have a white screen but the module actually runs. So if I put something in here, blah, you see it? There is something there. All right. So what you can do now is you can manually bootstrap. It's as easy as that. You just say application bootstrap this component, which is more or less the same thing as defining it in the bootstrap property. So, oops. Ah, yeah, entry components. Yeah. The only thing you have to do is you have to. What's going on? Components. App component. You have to declare in the entry components that it has it ready during the compilation of the ng module. So that works. So that's how you bootstrap an application manually. All right. Now, next thing we want to do, we want to bootstrap Angular. To bootstrap Angular, I need the upgrade module, which is provided by the Angular upgrade module here. And yeah, I need some kind of an application like this one here. So this is an empty Angular application with nothing in it. And we can bootstrap that Angular application, the AngularJs application. So when we go upgrade module, I need the upgrade module imported. So now what we have is same application with the only difference now that Angular is here in this application, AngularJs. All right. So that's the second thing, also not special yet, but it's a very important step because this is the first step you usually do when you want to do my Angular hybrid application. Now I want to show you the thing I already showed you in the slides. So what we do here is we want to get the injector injected, and then in the injector you want to get the demo service and say hi. What we actually need to do that is we actually need a demo service, so create that here. Service, call it demo, demo service, and then let's add a class. Oops. Demo service, say hi. Hi. So we have an Angular application with a demo service, and now we can just get the injector here, demo service, and say hi. That should work, and we should have a hi in our console over there. So that's how you actually access a service in Angular, an AngularJS service in Angular. Next thing is we're going to go through the example we already had before with Bob. So instead of a demo service, what you have here is we have our developer service. That's what Bob needs to actually do his work. And we're going to register that service here. Remove that one here. And okay, some copy paste code. But what we do actually a very similar thing like with the demo service. We have the developer service here, the provider, and the developer service. So we're going to register the provider here. Providers. But no, I don't get IntelliSense. And then we inject the developer service into our app component, and we should be able to my Visual Studio Code doesn't work correctly, but this is not a function. Now do work. Yeah. At the moment I do work like it would be with Notepad. Something doesn't work in Visual Studio Code. But as you can see clearly, now Bob works. You see it in the console. It stays up there. So now Bob works now, but he feels like, I don't want to work. I want to have Bruce doing the work. So let's create a service for Bruce. As we already know, Bruce is actually the same service. We just call it CodeMonkey. Okay. And it's going to be the CodeMonkey who works. This is going to be an AngularJS service, as we already defined. So it's going to be I'm going to call it Bruce, and it's our CodeMonkey service. So it switches to AngularJS. Now the application should still work, and we should still see Bob working it. Now, can you remember how we did it? How can we make Bob? How can we replace the developer service here with the CodeMonkey service? We actually, instead of the provider can be a lot of things. The provider can use a class to provide something, but it can also define a factory here. So that's what we do. We say use factory, and the factory is, we want to have the AngularJS injector, and whenever we call this factory, we just want to return Bruce instead. And the only thing we have to do now is we have to define the dependencies, because we inject here the Angular injector. So that's done like this. So now if everything works, yeah, it works. CodeMonkey is doing the work now. No, it doesn't work. But yeah, but thank you. All right, so yeah, CodeMonkey works. You just have to believe me what's in the console, but most importantly, do you see the code? And now, that's actually already the example, but I have one thing I want to do. As you can remember before, we can also use the injector here. So I have a quiz. And for this quiz, I'm going to put it back to use class. I have the developer service here. OK. So now, how could we get the, let's say we have here the $inject. Actually, I can copy it here. The injector. Okay. So what I want to have here is I actually want to call the developer service, this one here, and do work. So I want to say developer service, do work, without changing the constructor now. And whoever knows the answer can come down, code it with me, and then he gets this sticker. I have it here as well. And it's, some say it's actually a picture of Thomas. So you would have a picture of Thomas on your laptop. Might be something different. So who has an idea how we could achieve that? You're not allowed to change the constructor. Give you some hints. You already have the injector ready. And how do you get the developer service out of the injector. It's the AngularJs injector though. Nobody knows, or nobody wants a sticker?
When they come and code, they don't have to get this.
Yeah, you can also yell it at me if you don't want to come down, if you're a little bit shy. That's okay.
You directly inject the coder to service Bottomup service. I'm not sure if this is possible.
I mean, I could change it here. I could directly, yeah. That's one thing. I could just inject Bob in here.
But if you have the factory available in this injector, can you not just do $injector dot get the thing?
The problem is that what I have here is the AngularJs injector.
Right, but they are, I mean, you bootstrap both applications, right?
Uh-huh.
So then you would have both inject. You could get the other injector.
Yeah, you're on the right path. How could I get it? Okay,
It's a service that's registered there, right? So you can get a reference to the injector as a service.
That's what we're going to do. So what we have here is the AngularJs injector. And what we can do now is, that's in Angular. So within Angular, we say actually we want to get the, I'm not sure if it's the right thing. No, it's Angular injector. That's something you have to know. You have to know the key. And you only get the key by looking at the source code. But that's how you get the Angular injector. So that's Angular injector. And now we have the Angular injector. So what we can do now is we can just say Angular injector get. And here, it's Bob. It's the same thing. The get here is the same thing you would also type in here. I could also take this one here again, get that one again, and then like go do this the whole evening. But that's what I want to get is the service here, diff service, and then dev service do work. Let's see. And it works. Bob works. Nice. Stickers for you. You can get it afterwards. Thank you. Okay. I hope those examples helped you a little bit to understand more the concepts on how the inner workings of the hybrid application looks like. I have a few slides to like summarize the presentation. So the first thing is, I mean, now you know a little, or you know actually quite well how a hybrid application works, but that's just one part of it. You know how to upgrade, downgrade your services. There's always going to be a few tricky things. This is not a complete list. Those are just a few things I encountered during upgrading applications. This is actually not about Bootstrap 3 itself, but in general about, for example, UX frameworks. In the specific example, though, what we had is that we had Bootstrap 4. Actually, we had Bootstrap 3. And back then, it was only possible to use the directives of AngularJS with Bootstrap 3. And it was also only possible to use Bootstrap 4 with the Angular directive. So you have two frameworks, and both frameworks only provide one way how to use it. So we couldn't use Bootstrap 4 with AngularJS, and we couldn't use Bootstrap 3 with Angular. Which was the way how we worked around that was that we actually upgrade the whole application to Bootstrap 4 on a CSS level, and then patched the AngularJS directives to work with Bootstrap 4. This is actually an old thing, but that kind of stuff could happen as well. So in our case, router got deprecated and we couldn't use it anymore, which was quite a hassle. So we had to actually move to the new router. It wouldn't work with the hybrid one. As you might know, Angular has now I think the third iteration of the router in place. But now it looks good. People who work with AngularJS migration might know this one, the de-minification problem. It's really hard to actually do the de-minification, or actually the de-minification is the thing where Yeah, DI in AngularJS works the way that you just it parses the function and it knows foo is like the string, and then it tries to find based on that foo string where the service is for foo. Now the problem is if you minify that and it's A, it can't find it anymore. The way to solve that is there are 2 or 3 ways how to define it, but you have to tell Angular what parameter, what name it has. And one way to do it is like you have a string, you have an array with all the strings in the order of how the parameters are. And in the application we worked the last time, we didn't do that. We used a tool which actually did the DI minification for us. So we thought like it's really stupid to every time you want to add a parameter, remove a parameter, also maintain the list of parameter names. So we did it with a tool, and it's really difficult with Angular CLI, or it used to be very difficult with Angular CLI to use a tool, because Angular CLI is kind of like a closed thing, or used to be kind of a closed thing. As I heard, they open it a little bit, so it's going to be, or should be easier to add your custom build steps into the into Angular CLI, but can be a problem. And probably the most important thing is our third-party dependencies. So there might be, let's say, use a, I don't know, like a tooltip from your favorite AngularJS library. Might be not there might be not the exact tooltip available for your Angular counterpart. So you're sure going to find something else, but sometimes it doesn't look the same, doesn't behave the same, so you have consistency problems. So that's always something you have to think about when you start doing migration. All right, and to summarize the thing, one of the most important things about an AngularJS migration is it's a lot of work. Doesn't matter what tools you use or how you're going to do it, it's a lot of work. It's actually always as much work as you would do if you just like throw everything away and start from scratch. It's never going to be less, it's always going to be more. So the reason you want to do that is because you can't afford a big bang. That's, in my opinion, the only reason, because you want to continue to work on the application, provide features. So really think about whether it's not just easier to throw it away if it's a small application. Then start in small steps. Like start with a small component, look how it works. It's always good to, like, don't jump into too deep because there's so many things you have to solve. It's just like start small. And also AngularJS in general is a good framework. So if you did it well with the dependency, with the change detection and everything, it works quite well. So if your customer is happy, why migrate? That might also be a possibility. It's still going to run in 2025. Yeah. And it's going to still have an amazing community around it, even into 2030 probably. Yeah, then one thing is also refactor AngularJS already towards Angular. So think about how components are designed, how you would slice the models and so on. Makes it much easier. And also really think about which approach suits you the best. So there are multiple approaches on how to migrate Angular. And as I said, I think for most of them, top-down would be the best approach, but I'm sure there are other examples where top-down might be not the best approach. And yeah, also very important, embrace hybrid. Really, don't be afraid to put a hybrid application in production. It works quite well. And that's basically the key to a continuous migration. All right. Thank you for having me here, and happy migrating. So do we have a few minutes for questions, or do you want to do? Yeah. I'm also here afterwards, so if you have some longer questions, you also can just approach me. Any questions? Yeah?
How did you do your slides?
So the question is, how did I do my slides? Let me show you. The framework is called Impress.js. And what you actually do is you just put slides onto like you define the position of every slide, and it automatically moves from slide to slide. And I draw the lines on an iPad and then put them on Impress. Yeah.
So one thing you touched upon only really shortly is kind of the programming languages and the build of the hybrid application and of the. I mean, you said that TypeScript migration is not necessarily required for the AngularJS part.
Yeah.
But then also, if you have this hybrid, you need to somehow bundle it up, right, and run it. And, what is like? Can you maybe say a bit about this?
So the question is how would I bundle a hybrid application? So most people who worked with AngularJS, they know they use Gulp, Webpack, or whatever to bundle the application manually. The nice thing is it's very easy to bundle a hybrid application. And the way I did it actually almost every time is that I created a new Angular CLI project and just moved everything into the CLI. So the demo application you see here is a project created with Angular CLI, and the only thing you have to do to actually make it a hybrid application is, let me just revert that. The only thing you have to do is actually you have to import Angular and Bootstrap Angular. So the first 1 or 2 steps I showed, and then you have a hybrid application. And about you also had a question about TypeScript. So the thing is, if you're not going to touch old AngularJS code anymore, there's really not much sense to actually convert it to TypeScript, because you can just use JavaScript code within TypeScript easily. Just import it, and that's it. So the only thing you have to do is you have to make sure that it's bundled, and that's it. You don't need much more of it. So I wouldn't go through the work and actually migrate it to TypeScript if you don't need it. It's a nice thing if you start with an AngularJS application today to do it, but I don't think anybody would do that. Does that answer your question? Or?
Yeah, and the CLI is smart enough to minify and do everything for the AngularJS code.
Yes, so the CLI can do a lot, especially AOT can do a lot for Angular code, but doesn't do much for AngularJS code. It basically just minifies it and deploys it. There's not much you can do there, because there's no ahead of time compilation for AngularJS. Yeah. Other questions?
How big is the impact on runtime performance and bundle size and run both in parallel?
So the question is, how big is the impact during runtime and also for the bundle size? I don't have any numbers, to be honest. It largely depends on, one thing is you have to bundle AngularJS as well. AngularJS is not that big, so that wouldn't be that much of a hit. But usually you have more things, so we have a whole infrastructure. So at the current project, for example, we have 2 UX frameworks running in parallel, and both use quite a lot of code. So it really depends on your application. But just this application, we can actually have a look at it. It's not a big application, but we can, when we say npm ng build, gonna build it, and then we see. So this application is at the moment it's just Angular with Angular Upgrade and AngularJS.
There's also like some overhead like in the change detection, so that gets triggered much more. Because on AngularJS triggers in Angular and the other way around, so it depends how big it is, it can be okay or it can be bad. Yeah. So it depends.
Yeah. Also, there's also quite like the runtime thing, as Thomas mentioned, overhead with the change detection. Also to mention, if you really run into issues with change detection and everything, there is a way how to bootstrap AngularJS without putting it into a zone. So it runs outside of the zone, and then you would have to run change detection on your own. So by default, that's also a nice thing, is that whenever you bootstrap Angular and AngularJS together, whenever something happens in Angular, it automatically triggers change detection in AngularJS, as long as it is in the zone. So here is our dist folder, and the size of that application is, let me open that in the Finder. Vendor. So the main bundle is 330 kilobytes, and yeah, that's kind of it. Yeah. So it's not too bad at the moment. I mean, 300 kilobytes is already on the upper part, but I mean, also Angular is quite a big thing. I could run it again afterwards for you without Angular, without AngularJS imported. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah.
Do you have experiences with other migration paths, like using Angular elements and then ending up with web components and using your AngularJS indication? Or I even saw someone like putting out iframes depending on the route and loading the whole new Angular application. Did you try something else in NG and create downgrade? Or experience with this?
So the question is whether I have other experience like with other techniques than NG upgrade, like for example using web components or using iframes. I don't. Yeah. Okay.
Angular introduced that they support some sort for dollar location, but I couldn't really figure out what's exactly.
Yeah, the question is like Angular just released support. I think it's with the Angular 8, right?
Yeah.
They support support for dollar location. I haven't looked into that. Maybe Thomas can add something to that. Or does anyone know here about the dollar location with Angular 8?
So I think it has to do like that this location service in AngularJS and in Angular, they are not synchronized like out of the box, so that's also what we actually have to do in the project, like with the router and stuff, to like manually synchronize these things. Because if you are like which router actually is winning at that time and so on. And now there should be like some built-in synchronization between those two services, but I don't know the details. So it will be part of the Angular main release most probably, so that it will be well documented and everything, which should make it simpler.
All right. Any other questions? Good. Thank you very much.